Hello, and welcome back to the slideshow. I'm Dakota Jackson. I'm a trombonist based in New Orleans, and I'm devoted to creating an interest and appreciation on the trombone. And today, rather than normally having Ben with me, I have Jared Ramos stepping up to fill in because Ben is or was in Alaska, so he will be back. He's not gone forever. But Jared, tell us about yourself, man.
I'm currently based out of Utah. I'm from here. I play trombone. That's what I do for my job. Playing a couple different bands just around Utah and mostly like just the whole Midwest area. End up being a lot of different states around here. But yeah, no, it's good to be on. Excited to do it.
Yeah, Jared went to school with me at UNO. That's how we know each other, and it
Yeah.
was kind of my call for subbing, but obviously not anymore because Utah to New Orleans is a bit of a drive for
Yeah.
a $50 gig or something. So,
Yeah, no big deal.
but so like obviously it's been a long time since we put an episode out, and I'm sorry about that. I've actually been thinking about what I want to do. Maybe maybe I'm gonna start like a season thing. I've been thinking about that, like drop 10 at a time or something, so that it's a little bit more reliable because it's really hard to get on a schedule. Life just comes at you fast, man. It's like sometimes I have nothing going on. Like when I started this in the pandemic, I was putting them out once a week because I was just sitting at home trying not to get COVID. But now I've got gigs and trips and so maybe if I didn't have like a twice a month thing or something, but I don't know, maybe I'll talk it over with the hosts, and I don't know what we're doing in the future. Maybe having Jared as an option, or doing Jared and Ben on the pod will condense research a little bit. I don't know, but going forward, I'll try and be more reliable, and I really enjoy that those of you have stuck around. I know we have a large listener base in Germany, and that's super cool. I was super pumped when Frankfurt became our number one city over Dallas, just because it's really cool to me that a bunch of people who I don't know are like listening to this. When I started, I was always kind of pumped that I was like, I didn't really intend for anyone to listen, as you guys know. It was just about doing research, but I was like, it'd be cool if my mom and a couple friends listened, and so now having German guys hit me up on the trombone chat or wherever to talk about the episode is always a cool experience. Um, and I'm also gonna break into trombone in the news and stuff here in a second. But Jared, how's your week been, man? How's your, I guess,
It's
how things been going?
It's been good, and I'll add on to that saying this it's been busy summer season with gigs and stuff. I'm sure you feel it the same way. So I was definitely part of that. We planned on doing this podcast. It's been it's been a minute since we first talked about it, and then actually getting it done took some time. But now that summer's winding down, getting into the off season, get more time to do it. But yeah, it's been good. Lots of big changes coming. Yeah, like I said, things are winding down as far as gigs for the like just an off season. Since most of my work I do is for just wedding corporate type stuff, so summer is definitely where most of my income comes from. Um, so it's been nice to kind of just wind down, moved into this new spot, just getting comfortable with life. It's been good. What about you?
Yeah, for sure, man. I guess to do like trombone in the news. Normally I've been do this, but obviously breaking in new. So
Yeah.
the trombone in the news is there is a new game. It is on Steam, I believe. It's on PC, I know for sure. It's called
Yeah, it's on Steam.
oh yeah, it's called Trombone Champ. Which I don't know if it like literally just came out. It's like super brand new, but
It came out on the 15th of this month. It's brand new. I'm pretty
oh
sure the
gosh.
15th. Don't quote me on that, but I looked it up earlier because I was wanting to
Yeah,
buy it.
yeah. I have mixed feelings. I probably will at least check it out, but I don't like how the trombone sounds. It
Uh,
sounds super bad. It's like it's one of those like little synth trombone sounds, obviously, and it also the game punishes you pretty badly for not playing well, so it sounds bad most of the time. Which I don't love that it's like I don't almost making a mockery of the trombone, but I do kind of dig.
Totally.
I was watching like one of the preview videos, and you can like win a JJ Johnson card and shit, which I think is pretty cool. I mean, if I don't know, if like 2,000 people play it and 100 people from that group go away knowing who JJ is, putting that in their mix of whatever they're listening to, I'd call that a win, you know? I mean, I'm all
Totally.
about that. We just got to spread the word, you know?
Have you read the description of it?
I have not.
I got it right here. It's definitely making a mockery of it. I mean, you could just tell from how it sounds of it, how the trombone is just like this terrible MIDI thing, and you're playing. Like the video I saw, it was the Beethoven piece. It's just, it's just stupid, but it says honk, blow, and toot your way through over 20 songs, collect over 15 unique tromboner cards, and uncover the mysteries of the trombiverse.
The Tromboverse. I
Yeah,
didn't know we were in the Tromboverse, bro. I've been
I
doing
didn't
all these
either.
podcasts and didn't know we were in the Tromboverse.
Yeah, and yeah, we're uncovering the mysteries of it too. It's pretty mysterious. Only 20 songs though. That's wait, yeah, 20 songs. Yeah, 20 songs. That's pretty.
Yeah,
mm,
and I don't. They're not like trombone songs either.
No,
They're like just a lot of classical music and stuff. There's like "Oh Canada" on there. I
yeah. Well, I do agree with like the I saw the trombone cards. It's kind of like a joke, but it's also kind of gives exposure to a lot of trombonists. That most of the time people just it's not like household names. It is for trombone players, but as far as just the general public, no one knows who these people are.
Yeah, I saw they had like Melba Liston on there. That's always a
Hmm.
good one, you know. Like we should probably do an episode on Melba Liston at some point. Just like a really large impact on females in the trombone spectrum,
Hmm.
especially early jazz. I don't know if off the top of my head there's a bigger female jazz trombonist than Melba Liston. I mean, maybe there is. I'm not trying to disrespect anybody,
Yeah.
but she definitely was a paving the way for female trombonists. Um, so yeah, like getting getting into the episode here, I was talking to Jared about what he wanted to do, and I was kind of wanting to do a musician one. You know, we swap off between gear stuff, and we just did olds, which was probably one of my favorite gear episodes. It was just really cool to dig into history wise. A little bit more fun for me than looking at like the bore of of a pipe over and over again. You know, I mean, like at least there was something to kind of dig into as far as a history to go into. But I was looking at musician stuff, and I kind of thought about doing different groups instead of just doing individual trombonists over and over again, which we're going to keep doing, obviously. And I had shown Jared this album. I believe the first one I showed him was Mozambique, but like I had kind
Yeah.
of showed him like a bunch of Eddie Palmieri stuff, and he was like, "Yo, we should do one on this album." And I'm like, "Let's do all the trombonists that have worked with Eddie Palmieri and kind of do an Eddie Palmieri episode." Because when I was looking at different people, you know, Eddie has hired a lot of trombone players, and you know, I not for nothing. I think you got to show some respect for that because you know he could have not hired any. I mean, it's not like that was a requirement, but he has in his La Perfecta band, which is you know perfection the perfect band translated over, he has two trombone players. So I'm always, when I go to Latin band rehearsals, I'm always bringing that up. I'm always like, guys, like we should do an Eddie Palmieri setup because that's the perfect setup with two trombonists. So
Yeah.
yeah, super cool that he has two trombone players. And we're gonna start off just doing a little bio of Eddie, and I'm gonna let Jared take that over.
Yeah, so I got most of my source. I just went straight to his own website, his own bio that he wrote. I feel like that's like the most concise way to talk about it. But he was born in 36, so he's pretty old now. He's 85 years old, still playing all the time, especially in New York. I don't know if they're on tour or anything, actually. I haven't looked it up. Most of the gigs I see them playing right now is just all in New York area, but he was born in Harlem area. That's where he started playing piano just with like different groups. Um, he has a whole musical family too. His brother Charlie also plays and he was his older brother, not by that much though. So he's just like kind of around that Latin scene in Spanish Harlem, New York. going on like so his first like real group was with La Perfecta, which is also the name of the first album. It's kind of confusing because looking at it like now retroactively, you're mostly looking at the album, but it was really just like the band was also just called that. The group was La Perfecta. That's where he kind of just created that sound with the two trombones, like you were talking about. Set him apart from not only the other people in the area, but also kind of just created the sound. So his parents are originally from Puerto Rico, so he has the Puerto Rican background, but overall, all the music he's going to be playing and what came from that area is just Cuban music, which I thought was interesting. That we'll talk about this later too with like Barry Rogers, because I'm going to go into quite some depth about his life. He was just like a white guy, white Jewish guy born in New York, but has like some of the biggest influence on Cuban music coming out of New York. And it's the same with a lot of these people. It's like obviously Puerto Rico is a lot closer to Cuba, but has a huge influence on just like Cuban music and dance music. There was a quote, I'll maybe find it later, but their whole thing is just dance music. And even talking interviews with all the players, they're talking about how the recordings don't do it justice because it's more like the entire dance vibe of the shows they would play. And so part of his influence is not only these recordings and the sound of the music, but the entire dance scene in New York, starting in like the 50s to current. Moving
Yeah,
on to
man.
like,
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead, yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah, man. It's like I've noticed that with Latin music in general too. I think that's a big theme. Is like a lot of the different things that drive Latin music is in the rhythm section and kind of the styles and stuff, and salsas and sambas and merengues and things like this. These are all like different dances. Like there's a real close tie between the different styles in Latin music, Latin jazz included, and dancing. It's like it's not always that way in like other music. I know that it kind of is sometimes. Swing
Hmm.
is kind of a dance music. We don't really think about it like that super often now, but
Yeah.
that definitely used to be a thing. But yeah, it still has a very close tie in like the Latin world. And yeah, man, you're talking about like Eddie like being on tour. I was kind of impressed that he was on tour because he's getting so old. But like I think that's something I kind of want to hit up now is checking out one of his shows while I still can.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, as far as like, so this is again, I'm just gonna read this little section. So as far as his influence, when he came out in 1970 with Harlem River Drive, he says this recording was the first to merge what was categorized as black and Latin music into a freeform sound that encompassed elements of salsa, funk, soul, and jazz, which is like in looking at it right now, with not knowing the history of that, that seems so prevalent, that kind of music. A lot of Latin music is a combination of all of those elements. Um, but before then, it really wasn't, and he's kind of the grandfather of that merging of jazz and uh, salsa and all the Latin sound that came out of like jazz scene in New York. He's also the first person to win a Grammy for Best Latin Record, which I am. I don't really care for the Grammys. I don't think most people do. It's just kind of like people showing off, but still, especially in the 70s, that's a pretty big step forward as far as people appreciating Latin music in the US and accepting it as something that could be just as influential as other forms of American songbook tunes.
Yeah, man. I think it's interesting. Like he's from Harlem, and we'll get into this later. But it's like all of these dudes are from different parts of Latin America. It's like Puerto Rico, Cuba, Brazil, Mexico. They're all coming from these different places and coming to the Bronx, and then like spreading the music around. So yeah, I do think it's pretty cool that he like with the Grammy, and also just like in a way he kind of like he definitely shared Latin jazz with the world, even touring. I mean, I know they toured like even Europe and stuff with these groups, and so like he's got a huge part of that exposure and probably Latin music at large as well, just helping to share that out. I actually have a little quote here. I
Cool.
wanted to share because it's talking about his start. I found this not that long ago. It's just kind of cool little nugget I came across. Talking about how like the music he plays. He said, "I started out listening to those great Cuban orchestras and their followers in New York, the great mambo bands of Machito, Tito Puente, Tito Rodriguez." He said, "I was able to analyze and use the structures that came from those dance orchestras and intuitively and scientifically through my jazz teacher, Bob Bianco, and the music theorist, Joseph Schlinger. I found that compositions had tension and resistance, which relates to sex and danger, love and fear, and that leads to an exciting musical climax."
Wow. Wow.
So, just kind of like, but I mean, obviously, sex and danger, love and fear is just a great quote. But it does kind of speak to like he was very open to the music that was going on around him, not just in the Latin world, but like classical and jazz as well. And that's kind of why it's like I don't want to say like the inventor of Latin jazz because there's a lot of people in that, but like
Totally.
that's one of the reasons that he's like one of the big like pushers of pushing the music out and developing what it was coming out of Harlem at the time.
Totally. And he's still doing it. That's what's crazy. Have you seen his most like the NPR Tiny Desk he did?
I've seen like pieces of it. I
Yeah.
don't remember if I watched the whole thing.
It's really cool because it's just him playing piano. He doesn't bring any sort of band with him. But um I mean, as for us, it's clear like what draws us to some of these albums, like La Perfecta is the headlining trombones and just like insane, insane players. But just as a composer and piano player, um, just so talented and influential. Not because like his bands created all that, the whole dance scene and the entire sound was the band, but him as a person also, you can't forget that he's an incredible musician and piano player as well as a band leader.
Yeah, he's like a killing arranger, man. That's why those La Perfecta sound so good. Is it's like his arrangements are incredible.
Yeah. As far as the bio goes, I think that sums it up a little bit.
All right, so I thought about just like breaking down every single Eddie Palmieri album, but first of all, it was a ridiculous amount of albums.
Yeah.
It might actually be fun just to sit here and read through all of them because there's so many of
Yeah.
them.
Okay.
But but I did want to devote most of the time to talking about different cats that he's employed because this is a trombone pod. I think like this is kind of always a hope of mine of the for the episode, but definitely this one I wanted people to like find stuff that they were digging and go check it out. Like if you listen to this episode and like the takeaway is getting like one Palmieri album that you think is killer, then that's a total win. You know, that's what we're going for. Um, so that's why I'm trying to do a little bit about a lot instead of a lot about individuals. Although there's a couple that we're gonna feature, just because yeah, it's a lot of music. Okay, so I'm gonna read off I'm gonna read off all of his albums, and and maybe some are missing from this list because it's so big. But just to give you an idea of how vast, just to give you an idea of how vast his recording is. So in 1962, he does La Perfecta, which we talked about being like the first establishment of his band stuff, and then he does Echando Paliente. Oh, by the way, I am not a native Spanish speaker, so if I, botch the crap out of these, I apologize and trying to do my best here. Same thing when we do stuff in Europe. I'm constantly messing up European names, like German names and stuff like that, because it's always difficult. But I don't know. I'm around some Spanish speakers, so I do okay. But yeah, I'm definitely gonna mess up every now and then. Lo que traigo es sabroso in 64. Azuka Pati Sugar for You. What that translates to, I guess, in 1965. Mozambique, which is a killer album. Bombo Liate, maybe. Molasses, which I've listed as a nice one. Champagne, Justiça, Superimposition at the University of Puerto Rico. Vamanos Pale Monte, recorded live at Sing Song Volume 1, recorded live at Sing Song Volume 2. We're at Sentido. This is 1973, by the way. Give you an idea, about 10 years deep right now. Son of Latin Music, 73. Unfinished Masterpiece, 74. Eddie's Concerto, 76. Lukumi Macumba Voodoo, 78. El Dia que Me Quieres, 81. Eddie Palmieri, 82. Palo Pa Rumba Bajo Con Tumbao, 84. Solido, 85. The Truth, La Verdad, 87. Sueno, 89. El Rey de las Blancas y las Negras, 91. Music Man, 92. Palmas, 94. Chocolate Ice Cream, 95. Arete, 95. Vortex, 96. El Molestoso, Volume 2. Timeless, 97. El Rumbero del Piano, 98. Straight Ahead, 99. Life in the Bronx, 99. Masterpiece, Obra Maestra, 2000. La Perfecta 2, 2002. Ritmo Caliente, 2003. La Experiencia, 2004. Listen Here, 2005. Latin Side of Herbie Hancock, 2010. That's actually a Conrad album, to be fair, so... But he is on that album. This is just, by the way, all these albums are just him as a leader, just to talk about how crazy this list is. This is not including stuff where he's a sideman, which is absolutely insane. But Sabiduria, 2017, Full Circle, 2018, Mi Luz Mayor in 2018. And I think he's working on stuff as we speak. So, like, that's just an absurdly long list where, like I said, like, some of that didn't even get covered. And also, once again, hopefully I didn't botch anything too bad. And some of my favorites from here, I'll let Jared do some of his favorites as well, but Superimposition is one that I super dig. That's going to be an older one with Barry and Jose, and we'll get kind of into like the trombone cores, if you will, later on here. Son of Latin Music in 73 is one I really dig. And if you're looking for something kind of newer, La Perfecta 2 is a cool one. That's like the first Conrad one he did, I think. Right around there, yeah. And Listen Here is pretty cool. Actually, Listen Here is, if you're like a jazz person and you're like looking for like him playing specifically with like non-normal Latin jazz people who play straight ahead most of the time, Listen Here is a cool one. I think it has Michael Brecker on it even, which is killer. It's like a bunch of big cats. Christian McBride's on this album. Nicholas Payton is on this album. John Schofield is on this album. Yeah, so it's like some big time. Donald Harrison's on this album.
There's a couple of those New Orleans cats on there.
What do you dig, Jared? Like, what's
I'm gonna go back to the Mambo con Congo's Mozambique. That one, honestly, I knew Eddie's music before, but I didn't really know much about the La Perfecta like double trombone heading band until Dakota showed me, and this was, I think, the first album of that you showed me, introducing me to that idea, and I can't recommend it enough because it is so good. It's only 8 tracks, so it's not that long, but each track is super good. I don't know how to say it. The second track on it with Ismael Quintana, the vocalist. Sorry, I'm even worse at these names than Dakota. That's probably my favorite track. It's also the most popular track on the album. I don't know, that the sound. Obviously, if you already knew La Perfecta, then you already knew the sound. But for me, this is the first introduction to that sound, and it just is now ingrained in my mind as like the album I'll go to if I'm listening to his music. Honestly, yeah, that's the only one I'm gonna like really hone in on recommending. Because we'll talk about the other ones a bit, and there's some later ones when we get into Barry Rogers that I would like to also recommend. But as far as just like a solid album, this one, Mozambique.
Hell yeah, man. I actually play with my Latin bands. I actually play a song off this album because or off of Mozambique because I wanted because that was like one of my pushes. Like as I've gotten more ingrained in the band, I'm like I want to play cool stuff and definitely want to play cool trombone stuff. And I mean, this like Eddie's the guy. So and this album is has always been a big one for me too. So with me, Mambo Congo, I play that one,
Hmm.
and I think it's pretty cool. I don't play with two trombone players, so when I play it, I always feel this extra pressure to like have like a big ass sound because it's like you know that's one of the things. That's why I got this like draw to Eddie. That's not actually how I learned about him. I'll go over that in a minute, but like these early albums I don't like the groove is just so good, man, and it's not like you listen to these albums with like these super killing dudes like Marshall Jokes or something and they're just like tearing up and you're like, "Oh my god, that's insane." It's like more than that. It's like everyone's so invested in the rhythm and the time that it's like just sounds super nice. It's like definitely a group effort. But I will say like with those older trombone albums, it's like you can't it doesn't always sound that hard because it just kind of sounds like their background stuff. But if you try playing those parts, man, these dudes are ripping. Like
Yeah.
there's like some pretty crazy jumps, man. I'm just like kind of flying through 16th notes, and I've got like a high B and then like a A in the staff, and then I go back up. You know, it's like they definitely had chops, and I'm glad like we're talking about them. You know, because like not only did these guys uh like bring Latin music everywhere, like we were talking about. This was like introduced like kind of what Latin trombone should sound like and set that sound up there. I mean, they're huge. That they're I would say that these guys are kind of like what J.J. Johnson is to straight ahead jazz. Like these guys are kind of that to Latin jazz or Latin music. I mean, it's like they're like the old recordings that you need a reference to if you want to sound like you're supposed to sound, if you want to understand the idiom for sure. But yeah, I've definitely enjoyed playing their music and I'm always trying to. So yeah, Mozambique's killer album. Um, so when talking about La Perfecta 1 versus La Perfecta 2, there is literal albums called La Perfecta 1 and La Perfecta 2. And those albums do kind of set who those groups are. But for La Perfecta, but they're also bands that like traveled around. So it's not just the album personnel from those albums because they would switch around and it was just like Eddie's band was La Perfecta, kind of like the Stan Kenton Orchestra or something doesn't always have the same trombone section depending on like when you saw them and all that. But for La Perfecta 1, the two main guys are Barry Rogers, who I'm going to let Jared dig into, and Jose Rodriguez. And I just want to say, like, with Jose, and I noticed this. I was talking to some of my friends about it and stuff. It's like the research for Jose was super hard, and it was kind of made me sad because, like I said, these guys are the guys. You know, this is the Slide Hampton, J.J. Johnson, if you will, of this music. It's like there's not much out there. I mean, honestly, I feel like I should have been able to Google Jose Rodriguez and get like a real big deep dive into him, and that's like almost non-existent. I trying to find out when he was born was super hard. Trying to find out if he was still alive was honestly difficult, and that's a little upsetting. I mean, I found a couple write-ups. One I had to translate from Spanish. Um, but even like, I found out he was from Brazil, kind of. It said he was from Brazil, but then Jared found out that maybe he's not from Brazil. Apparently, he is Dominican. What's to do with that, man?
Yeah. So I found this most of my resources. There's like a have you ever used the Wayback Machine?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
So that's like where most of these sources are because there's so many every reference to either um La Perfecta or Barry Rogers was like dead links all over the place, links that went nowhere. So using this, I found an article in 99 called Barry Rogers Salsero Searcher World Musician. And that is where it drops the bomb on it saying Let's find exactly what it says. Well, exactly that. It doesn't mention Jose like much at all. It just says um, the second trombonist was Jose Rodriguez, a Dominican who resided in Brazil for a number of years and stayed with Palmieri until 74. So that's the only mention this article has of him, but it also is different than what everyone else is saying about him, that he's just Brazilian. At least it does account that he lived in Brazil. So I'm inclined to believe this. And then everyone just reminds us, oh yeah, yeah, he was just like a Brazilian guy.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
I mean, especially given how much information on him, that seems like that would be the likely
yeah.
case. You know.
Even the name, that could be a Brazilian name, but the way it's spelt is like less so for Portuguese. So I'm inclined to believe that he is probably Dominican.
Yeah, I will say this too. With all of these guys, whether he was Brazilian or Dominican, one of the cool things about this whole Eddie Palmieri thing and really Latin music in America in general is that it doesn't really matter what Latin American country you're from in terms of who you're going to play with. Like, if you're from the Dominican, Mexico, or Brazil, or Puerto Rico, because all of these guys are coming together as a community in Harlem. And there's also, we'll get into this later, but there's this really cool like root system where a lot of these guys were around to talk to these younger guys, and there's still kind of a lineage of the newer trombonists, like in Harlem, like the Spanish Harlem Orchestra, and their connection to these older guys that were in these bands, because they all kind of came together and formed these bands in Harlem instead of where they were from, and so whether he's from the Brazil or Dominican probably didn't have a big impact on Eddie. Just he was like a Latino musician working in this community in Harlem. And if you look him up, you can find some pictures of him. I actually put them on my little research doc. Not that that really does anything for you, but uh, he's got like these really thick, like goggle-looking glasses. I don't know, this is weird, but I'm really into like when dudes have some kind of signature item that makes up their look. Like I'm really into the fact that Fontana has like his little sunglasses. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can go look up videos of Carl playing, and there's, I'd say, a 75% chance he's wearing them. I was just, right before this, I was showing Jared a video of Carl wearing his glasses, his sunglasses inside in like a hotel or something. So, yeah, like this guy has these, they're prescription glasses, not sunglasses, but he has the glasses he wears. Eddie, like his career was projected mainly with Eddie Palmieri. He was like always playing with Eddie and Barry Rogers in that section, but he also played with Cal Jadar, who I actually don't know a ton about. I know he's pretty famous and a big part of Latin jazz, but I honestly didn't until I did some research. I didn't even realize that he wasn't Hispanic himself. He's white and he's a vibraphonist. And I also did a little Google on how to say his name because it's Tjadr. I think, or Ar. I used to always think it was like Jadar, like a J sound, but I think it's straight up Jadar. I don't know if you. I'm not 100% on that, so if you know more, please let me know. And I'll also say, if you just straight up look up Jose Rodriguez in Google, you're going to get a baseball player. You will not get this trombonist. But even if you type in Jose Rodriguez trombone, you're still going to get split results because there's a guy who's currently assistant trombone in the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra named Jose Rodriguez, which good for him. And he's getting a little shout out right here. I did not deep dive him because it's not really related to him, but congratulations, Jose, on being the assistant in Cincinnati, you know? And I also just wanted to, I'm pretty sure this list is complete here. But here's a little list of the albums he's on that I know for sure is. Once again, guys, I gotta say this before and after all of these. Like, I'm gonna botch some of these, but here's my best attempt at these. Lo que traigo es sabroso, which was with Eddie Palmieri in the La Perfecta band.
Can I say something real quick?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I think earlier people are already getting upset at us, but so he's actually Jose Rodriguez is not the one on La Perfecta one.
Oh yeah.
But his first, I think his first appearance was the one you just mentioned.
Yeah, the Loque Triego Esabroso,
Yes.
which also ties into what I was saying about how La Perfecta is a band and
Yeah.
not just the
Actually,
album, because that band was definitely the La Perfecta band on that
yeah.
album, Loque Triego.
I'll tell you right. Sorry, I just like cutting you off on this, but
No, no,
an
you're good.
interesting point on that is that so on if you look at the album cover for La Perfecta, the only one holding an instrument is Barry Rogers, but also in the album art is Mark Weinstein, but he's not even on the album. He's like he was the first second. It says he's the first like regular member as second trombone, but he's not on the album. It's Joao Donato, who is Brazilian, which is also why I think people get confused because he's Brazilian and then Jose Rodriguez. People say he's Brazilian. Who knows? And then he shows up later. But it's like such a weird thing. Looking at, I'm pretty sure Barry Rogers is the one holding the trombone. And then the other trombonist somewhere in that picture is Mark Weinstein.
That's incredible, man.
Yeah,
That's a
it's
great deep
it's
dive.
all over the place.
Yeah, that La Perfecta album, they're like all sitting on a car, right?
Yeah.
Like something like they're like out in a field under a
Uh-huh.
bridge or something, like all wrapped around a car wearing these little red outfits. Yeah, that's amazing.
Sorry, you could go ahead now, but that's such a
No, no.
weird it made it confusing because I'm like looking at it, I'm like, okay, I can tell it's Barry Rogers because like he has very distinct glasses and like just kind of a look, a style about him. Um, but then as far as the other people, I'm like they all kind of I can't tell because they're so young, and then pictures of them are either of later in life, and you can't really tell in that one picture, especially since they're all wearing the same outfit and they're not holding instruments except for Barry Rogers.
Yeah, man, that's definitely that's the kind of nuggets that I like to
Yeah.
dig up on the show. That's incredible. Yeah, so going through all of Jose's albums here, we got like I said, Loque Trigo. I don't actually know how to say that. Sorry about my ESPN notification there, guys. No, this is not an ESPN pod. I'm not playing
Talking about our
ESPN.
sponsors for today,
Uh,
ESPN.
I know, man. We used to do the fake beer sponsor on here,
Uh,
but I don't know, man. I don't know. I want a real beer sponsor before I keep doing
yeah.
it. I'm holding out now. If you're out there and you make beer, I am free game. Just talk to me. We'll see what we can work out. Um, so it's a Loque Traigo Estabroso with Eddie. Mama con Conga is Mozambique with Eddie Palmieri. El Sonido Nuevo, the new soul sound, and that one's with called Jadar and Eddie Palmieri. Cuba y Puerto Rico Son with Tito Puente, which is another huge name in the Latin jazz world. Molasses with Eddie Palmieri. Bombaliete with Eddie Palmieri and Carl Jadar. I definitely messed that one up. Live at the Live at the Red Garter, Volume 1, Fania with the Fania All Stars, Champagne with the Eddie Palmieri and Orchestra, Volume 2 recorded live at the Red Garter with the Fania All Stars again, Justicia with Eddie Palmieri. I'm pretty sure that's just how you say justice in Spanish, but I feel like I'm botching it. Justicia? I'm not sure. Superimposition with Eddie Palmieri. Vamonos Pal Monte with Palmieri. Recorded live at Sing Sing with Eddie Palmieri in the Harlem River Drive. Recorded live Sing Sing Volume 2. Son of Latin Music, one of my personal favorites, with Eddie Palmieri. La Voz Hector Lavoe. La Voz with Hector Lavoe. There Goes the Neighborhood with Willie Colon. And Mon Rivera. Real quick about Willie Colon before I keep going here. If you don't know who Willie Colon is, it's probably worth a check because he is a trombonist himself. He's a trombonist singer, and more famous, I think, as a singer band leader, and he usually has another trombonist with him. But I remember one time I was doing a gig with my Latin band, and this guy came up to me and he was like, "Do you know?" It's like, where did you learn to play trombone or whatever? And I'm telling him, like, I went to UNO and all this stuff. And he's like, man, if you want to learn about the stuff they don't teach you in school, he's like, you need to go listen to Willie Colon. Like, that's the real shit. And I was like, all right, man. So I guess if you want to learn about the stuff they don't teach you in school, you should go check out Willie Colon. He's definitely like a big personality, singer, trombone player. Um, Live at the University of Puerto Rico, another great album. I actually, well, I love that album because it's like very live. It's like almost recorded in the back of a bunch of college students or something. And but I always dig these albums. It's nice to have stuff that sounds super good and in a studio and super clean, and especially if there's none of that, you really want that. But it's also nice, like when there's a bunch of stuff like with Eddie, where he's been in the studio, to have like this fly on the wall. It's almost like you're not supposed to be listening to it, so it's a little treat. So I would say check out that album. There's 2 volumes of them. I think there might have been different visits to the University of Puerto Rico, but the group is super killing. He's on Con Sosa, Con Ritmo, Volume 1. Siembre with Willie Colon and Ruben Blades, a very famous Latin jazz percussionist. Con Sosa, Con Ritmo, Tiene Calidad. Comedia with Hector Lavoe again. Los Líderes de la Salsa Libre. Feliz Navidad with Hector Lavoe. I have a feeling that's a Christmas album. Maestra Vida Primera Parte Willie Colon and Ruben Blades. Maestra Vida Segunda Parte with Willie Colon and Ruben Blades. Caratula de Celia y Willie with Celia and Willie Colon. And Canciones de Solar de los Aburridos with Willie Colon and Ruben Blades. And that's a crap load of albums. I know I stopped on there, but the guy has worked a lot and been a big part. I mean, you know, even outside of Eddie Palmieri, Tito Puente is a huge name. Cal Jadar is a big name. I mean, he was a huge part of bringing the Latin trombone sound to the rest of America and also to Europe and whenever they toured. And also, once again, I'm sorry if I mess some of those up. I definitely messed a lot of those up, except for Feliz Navidad. I feel pretty confident in that one, just because the song is very popular. But let's. I also want to talk about his, before we cut to break here, talk about his partner in crime, Mr. Barry Rogers, and I know you did a lot of digging on that.
Oh yeah, that's honestly I used most of my research into Barry Rogers to get into like a lot of the albums because he's on a ton of them. I'm not even going to list all the ones he's on because it's kind of vague some of the times. Because again, it's just like, oh, the Love Perfect the band, great. Who? Like probably Barry Rogers and then someone else, and it's like a cast of 5 people. So yeah, Barry Rogers is also from the same area, New York. That's kind of how he was introduced to Eddie, and it's interesting that the main source I got most of this stuff from is called I've already mentioned it. Barry Rogers Salsero, Researcher, World Musician by David Karp. It's an article published in '99, so it's kind of old, but so Barry Rogers has a son who's still living, and I think it's Chris Rogers. It's a trumpet player. On his website, he recommended this article, so I feel like it's pretty substantial and accurate. But even then, like most of his son's resources for his dad is like what he heard from his dad's friends and like what he kind of heard going around. So as far as like all these quotes and stuff, this is where I get it from the main article, but it doesn't mention like when it was it says who said it, but it doesn't say when. But so he started playing in like high school. They were saying they think he started playing trombone around 16 and just kind of like kept on going with it. But they also say he doesn't have any formal training, which a lot of these guys are the same way, just playing by ear and being around the music. I kind of want to go into something that hurts to say, but also is very distinct to the sound. So listening to Barry Rogers in a lot of these early albums, it's like some of the first trombone that sounds like that with like the crazy brass, loud, splatty, maybe not splatty, but you know what I mean, just distorted because of how loud it is. Um,
Yeah, like a ton of edge.
yeah, it's like the current New Orleans sound and still the current Latin sound, but it's just you could just tell they're playing so loud and probably not great for their lips. Um, Talking about that, uh, there's like a whole part of this article just talking about how terrible Barry's lips were and his playing. So you could tell with Barry and the sound of like all these Latin stuff, that brassy sound, like I was just mentioning. Um, Part of the reason I was there's a quote I can't remember who it was. A lot of these quotes are by Mark Weinstein, who was the first, second trombone player, like we mentioned, the one on the album cover, but not actually on the album. Most of the quotes are from him because he had a pretty close relationship with Barry, but they were talking about kind of why they played so loud. Not only was it they just enjoyed the sound, as do I, but a lot of these shows, like we mentioned, they were dance shows. And with dance music, you just turn up the volume. So, and especially back in like the 60s and even before that, um, especially before that, there was just no microphones. And if there was a microphone, it was for the vocalist. So there's usually one microphone on stage, and everyone else is either trying to point towards it to try to get a little bit into it, or just has to blast as loud as possible. And that just kind of gets to a point where it literally creates a whole new sound because you're distorting and playing so loud, which I think sounds so good. And I think that's what people like about it, but it also takes a toll on your um, it's a physical toll because it's not easy to do that. And for Barry Rogers, his it says multiple times in this article that he had to just jam um the mouthpiece into his lips as hard as he could and then just blast. And that's how he got that sound, which is just terrible because oh 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 my gosh, there's the craziest thing. It was talking about um this article makes the craziest like connection, and I don't believe it, but also um it's just insane. They're talking about the toll that kind of takes on that. Someone said like there's so much pressure and that this a physical the physical toll could kill them. And it says I can't remember exactly what it says, but it said and they ended up taking his life. I'm like, what? What do you mean it ended up taking his life? He didn't play so loud that it took his life. But his we'll get to this later. But he did oh, I found it. Those trombones, when they used to get into a riff behind the flute, they don't stop. And then Barry just takes off and keeps going. And we just kept pushing and pushing. That instrument is not an instrument to be able to do that. And they did it. And unfortunately, it cost them dearly because they both passed away. They were both young. It like makes it sound like he like just played some super loud note and died. Like,
That's like the most metal thing we've
yeah.
ever had on the show. I mean, I will say, I guess you could. I mean, you could definitely damage your lips. I
Yeah,
guess you could like have like an aneurysm. Like I guess that could happen.
totally.
Um, but man, yeah, I feel what you're saying about like the different, like just playing so loud that you've created like a new style of playing and tone and stuff. And I think about that a lot because there's definitely people out there who think like no, the trombone should be played like this. And there's like
Yeah,
schools of trombone that have existed for like hundreds of years. You know, like especially in the classical world, a lot of trombone technique and stuff has been developed over a super long period of time, but I mean, there is different sounds, and that's honestly one of the things I love about the trombone. It's one of the things I love about a lot of instruments. You know, Paul Desmond on the saxophone sounds nothing like Sonny Rollins, or
oh yeah,
John Coltrane sounds way different, and I think that's like a really beautiful thing in general. And it's like I do think it's cool to do that, and I also think like one of my favorite things to say when it comes to any kind of trombone pedagogy thing is like a lot of times there's more than one way to skin a cat. Which I also
totally.
love that saying. If you're a cat guy, I'm sorry. I don't mean to offend the cat people out there. I'm not actually gonna skin a cat.
Yeah, this
But
podcast is now just like different ways to skin cats.
all of our cat people are gone. This is a dog person pod hardcore now. But no, I do think like yeah, there's definitely a lot of different style stuff, and like I was saying earlier, when I'm playing Mozambique with my Latin group, I'm not a very blasty guy, and I work really hard to have like a fundamentals to where I can emulate things from different genres through a core of training of something else. But I do have like a big initiative to like have a really large sound and try and be really big because of that. And also talking about, you were saying like, oh, it's because they were dancing that, and there was like no microphones that they sound like that. I think I had a professor who brought this up to me once, and I thought this was super fascinating and maybe worth a deep dive, maybe even worth an episode later on. Is that uh, architecture has a large impact on sound for the
Hmm.
trombone or any instrument for that matter. And I do think that this is true and kind of interesting. It's like the reason that a lot of jazz guys, especially modern guys, don't play crazy loud is they play in tiny clubs. They play in tiny groups, like, and there's the wall. Like, if you play in small, like, if you go to New York and you play at Smalls or the Fat Cat, now the Cellar Dog, I guess they've changed their name, somewhere like that, these are not huge venues. And if you listen to Joe Alessi, he has, like, a massively huge sound, or any, you know, great concert trombonist, Christian Lindbergh, Ian Mansfield, Jorgen von Rien, whoever, because like they're playing in concert halls all the time, and not only are they playing in concert halls, they're playing with a full orchestra. If you're playing trombone and you've got like a bass player, a piano player, and a drummer behind you, and especially a sensitive drummer, you don't got to play super loud. And I think this is just another product of that. Like, you're playing in this atmosphere where everyone's getting sweaty dancing and like the band's getting loud. And I mean, I've been in this situation too where I'm playing like a pretty hyped up show and like I'm not mic'd up, so it's like, all right, we're gonna have to get loud. That can have a huge impact on your tone. So I do kind of feel like the atmosphere slash architecture environment, whatever you want to call it, having an impact on creating this new sound for people like Barry Rogers.
Totally. Yeah, there's like just big dance halls, especially just not being mic'd. I mean, that's what I mostly play exclusively dance music these days, um, as a trombonist, and so it quick tangent. Um, I play a lot in Jackson, Wyoming, and there's a noise ordinance there, and so they've been putting restrictions on how loud the band can be, which the trombone naturally just like breaks that because it's such a loud instrument. So we've been having to like deliberately play a bunch of like high energy pop music quieter. And as a trombonist, it's like makes the parts harder to play because they're written to be played loud. You just play differently. Maybe that's also like part of my own fault for not practicing quiet more often, but it's just like harder because you just hit notes differently when you play different styles of music like that. So that definitely has a huge influence on this style of music. What was I gonna say about Barry? There's a lot of things to see. Also, like a weird fun fact about him is he's like a huge car nerd. So he just like had a bunch of cars, and that was like his equal passion to trombone was fixing old cars and doing mechanic work.
Nice.
Super robust guy. Um, also found the quote. It was by Jose Rodriguez saying that if he keeps on playing loud, he's gonna kill himself.
What is up with this, man? It's
Yeah.
like, I think Jimi Hendrix is pretty cool. He's got all the distortion. Some people hate that, but I don't
Hmm.
think that him adding distortion was threatening his life. I mean, if this is actually hurting his health to be playing this loud, then that's definitely the most metal thing
Yeah,
ever.
for real. And uh, pushing so hard on his lips, but also Barry had like chronic cold sores all the time. So there's a terrible I say terrible because it just like hurts to hear. Um I think it's yeah, Weinstein is talking about how he says he also had cold sore problems. He was very susceptible to cold sores, and like most brass players, he get the cold sore right on the rim. I mean, he and I for a while were both Blistex addicts. We would carry Blistex around, rub it on our lips, and then he mentions a couple of venues where you had to play super loud, but it's like they were literally just like numbing their lips and then playing gigs. It's just insane. And also his when he did die in 91, he just died in his sleep and there was no like confirmed cause. So people like this article likes to be like, yeah, there's that volume. It got him. Hey, that's just I don't even know what to think of that, but
It's like
yeah,
he was a
super metal.
weightlifter. He was just
Yeah.
pushing it too hard.
Um, it's super interesting. Also interesting about that they're talking about his technique, that trombone like mashing your lip in. Uh, what is you'll have to remind me if it's upstream playing is like the way you play, right?
Yeah, I guess there's like upstream, downstream. I haven't really thought about it that much, but it's just like a location of your lips within the mouthpiece,
Right.
like like where you're at. Yeah, like if you're
Totally.
higher, I guess you're playing. I guess you're playing upstream, and if your
I think
mouthpiece is lower, it's downstream.
yeah,
I
I'm
don't know.
forgetting, but
I've never thought about this, to be honest with you,
yeah.
Doc. Like
Oh, interesting.
I know it's a thing, and I know the first time I was introduced to it was Bob McChesney has a little write up about it, but I I don't know. I
Okay.
like I haven't really thought about where my mouth is in the mouthpiece that much. Although there
Probably
have
means you
been
have good technique.
I don't know about that, dude. I mean, I will say like I know that God, what's his name? The French hornist who was in the Chicago Symphony, like in the '80s when they were really killing Arnold Jacobs and all those guys.
Mhm.
I want to say it starts with an F. I don't want to get it wrong, but anyways, he like wrote a bunch of books using trombonists and all the instrumentals, trumpet players, and everybody who was in that orchestra. He made like a bunch of reference material about like the fundamentals of brass playing and like
Hmm.
what these people were doing, and that was one of the things that he investigated was like where everyone's lips were in
Yeah.
comparison to their instrument. So it's definitely
Interesting.
out there if you're into it.
Yeah. But about that, Weinstein was saying that he probably played with too much upper lip in the mouthpiece and that his range. So I haven't actually like I've tried to play along with these La Perfecta stuff and I don't think it goes above a D ever. I can't remember, but that's what he was saying is even though Barry had like a really strong sound, the entire range of the trombone, it pretty much just capped out at D, which is interesting because that's exactly like my problem a lot of the time. If I'm playing the same kind of style, it's like it just capped out at D or D flat. Um, Also, you said your listeners like to know about gear. I couldn't really figure out what trombone he played because he kind of all over the place. Every once in a while, he has an F attachment. I even saw him. Is it? I can't remember the name. It's like a super bone. It's the one with it's like a valve trombone, but also maybe it's just a valve trombone I saw. I would just assumed it also had the slidey part of it. Maybe that didn't exist yet.
Yeah, I don't know when the Super Bone came into existence. I would be surprised if it was around back then. I think that's
Yeah,
a relatively new thing.
maybe it's just a valve trombone. But I was like looking at him like, okay, this trombone has valves. There's like one picture of it. I don't think he like played on it much, but you should look at the document, the last picture, and you have to let me know what in the world mouthpiece he's using. Because that happened,
Man,
there's like multiple pictures of him using that.
putting me on the spot, man.
Well, I don't know if you've
Rough.
seen anything like that.
All
For people
right.
listening, it's like it looks like a cap over the mouthpiece.
That thing is definitely gnarly. Okay. Well, first of all, also, let's see if I can get another picture of the dude here with the trombone in his hand. With these older ones, I just usually the newer ones, people are endorsed, so they will have info out there.
Right.
But these older ones, I usually eyeball it, and if you want to go off the Dakota Jackson guessing, I guess. It's a. I'd say this is a King 3B, bro. I'm looking at it. I'm looking at the. It looks like it's got the King crook on the famous little crook for the King. Given the age, it would probably be a King. I'm also looking at this valve here. It looks like the King 3B with the F attachment. valve. When I'm saying this, it could also just be like a king. What's their? They've got like an intermediate with a trigger, so it could just be that. But I don't know. It's probably a 3B. I mean, given the guy's significance and everything, and the valve really looks 3B-ish to me.
If you go to that link I just posted under the picture, there's a whole bunch of pictures that his son posted on his website. And it has a couple of those pictures with like some crazy.
Okay. Well, it looks like he doesn't always use that
No.
mouthpiece. I will say, looking. Oh, here's a colored one. Here we go. Yeah, I will say, looking at this mouthpiece thing he's got going on, I would. I'm not sure. I mean, it's definitely crazy. It's definitely worth checking out if you're not hip to it. I would say that it is a cover, like an attachment that you can put
Yeah.
on. You can. I've seen them on trumpets more often because they're always trying to get mass on their mouthpiece, which
Mm.
is a whole nother hot button topic. I'm not trying to make statements on whether you should or shouldn't do that, but like the megatone, Bach megatone
Mm.
mouthpiece is designed like that, like it has more mass in it.
Yeah.
This looks like one of these covers that you'd put on there, but I will say, in the colored pictures, it's clearly white, like it
Yeah.
looked like in the thing, and there's a very small chance one of these, it looks like it might just be the rim. That's a gold rim on that one. Looks like he definitely moved around. I will say, um, there's a very small chance that it's ivory.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that for sure because that's those are super rare, but I do know like the episode we just did, we were talking about olds had some mouthpieces where they used ivory rims. Obviously, you can't get that anymore.
Yeah.
People aren't killing elephants for mouthpiece rims, but there's a small chance that that's what it is, given the time and everything. I do think that the cover overall is probably not ivory. It does look like something he threw on there. That is definitely gnarly. That's definitely
Yeah.
worth an investigation. It also looks like some of these horns are a Con 88 with a close wrap. If I had to put a name on it, the valve. Yeah, this is definitely just a valve trombone, bro.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know like how many valve trombones you looked at. They always still have the slide on them. This one's a little long or whatever, but
Yeah, I just saw how long it was and just assumed.
yeah. It looks like he used different equipment. With the older guys, it's always tough to tell unless you like get a good look. Look, one of these videos, he's got the valve trombones a Con. Looks like it might be a 6H. Um, Yeah, I don't know. That's just my eye test, guys. I don't know. If you really want to know, go look. I'd say I'm decent at guessing. I mean, especially since I do this pod, you know. But some of you guys are really good, so go check it out.
Yeah. So, a little bit more about him. He kind of just, actually, before I get to that, I'm going to talk about just a whole section of this article that I don't know if we're allowed to, I don't know if we're allowed to swear on this podcast, but it says that effing trombone. Well, it's interesting because they go into a whole thing about like how he's a trombone player, but he's mostly just a musician, and he actually hated trombone. He thought it was like just super annoying because he just the limits of it and how technically hard trombone can be. So he was constantly fighting trombone. Okay. This is a quote from Mark Weinstein again. It says Barry and I never called it a trombone. We called it a fucking trombone. Man, that's what it was. I mean, for Barry and I, the trombone was an an effing cross that you bear. We hated the effing thing, and you couldn't do shit with it. This swears a lot. But he's complaining about going from B flat to B natural. That is just stupid. They say like triggers suck because it's more weight on your left hand. Um, they just like bash it and say like, yeah, I said he loved the sound of it, he loved the voice of it, he hated the problems of it. But I actually think that's pretty relatable, for a lot of us. I mean, you can get into like, I don't know how you feel about it. I kind of hate trombone in that same way. Like we had this whole conversation last time I was in New Orleans about like leaning into the limitations of the trombone or like the slidiness of it. And how it can be annoying if you're always trying to fight that. So that sounds like kind of what they did. They like hated it, but also loved it for the
Yeah,
same reason.
I think I think that's a lot of cats. You know, I've always been interested in like I actually know some really good trombone players who like don't love listening to trombone music, and I'm
Huh.
like, man, like that's definitely not me. Obviously, the guy sitting here with a podcast about trombone, but I will say, yeah, man, trombone's hard, and I think it's funny that it's always got its limitations, but like some of the stuff that you complain about the first time you play trombone, like the B flat to B thing, is the same thing you'll be complaining about when you're 80. It's like D flat is hard when you're in middle school because you just can't find the tuning, and then
Yeah.
like you know what? It's like it gets better and it gets easier. It's still harder than it is on the trumpet. It'll always be harder, and but also at that same thing, it's like it is a unique beast, and yeah, there's definitely. I know Conrad always calls them like trombonisms, and I think it's the name of Bill Watrous' technique book is trombonism. But it's like there is all these. The trombone is extremely difficult, but you gotta ask yourself like why are we still playing it? Like why not just play the
Yeah.
euphonium, which is way easier. Not
Yeah.
to hate on all you that are euphonium. If you're, by the way, if you are a primary euphonium guy listening to this pod, thank you. I appreciate you. Like that is way out of the norm. I kind of assume that 99, maybe 100% of our listeners are mainly trombonists. But if you're a euphonium guy, thank you for listening. But yeah, why not just do the euphonium? It is easier, and a lot of the problems with the trombone don't exist. It's because the trombone has a lot of stuff to uniquely offer. I was talking to a non-trombonist, just like a guy I work with who listens to trombone. God bless him. Um, and he was talking about how he was like, trombone is a jazz instrument because it does all these like slidey things, and it's like because of that, like it's like got this weird little niche world it lives in because it can do the slidey things. And I'm like, well, while that's true, and it's definitely cool that it can do the slidey things, it's like when you listen to Irby Green play, he's not being comical, he's not being funny, but he's using every aspect of the trombone that you couldn't have gotten on a trumpet. You can't replicate that with another instrument. And it's like, even in the orchestral world, it's like definitely not funny. It's a very serious instrument, and
Yeah.
it's creating this like there's so many perks to the trombone that other sections don't have. I mean, the tuning, there's a lot of instruments where you have to adjust with some kind of like lead pipe, or you have to, I'm not lead pipe, but like a tuning pipe, or you have to like lip it down or whatever. The fact that the ability of a trombone section in an orchestra to like create chords that are tuned super well because like the third's going down a little bit or whatever, and you have these really good musicians listening to each other, that's incredible. I think like, and so I guess to tie this all the way back into what you were saying about them hating the trombone, yeah, I do think that the trombone has a lot of people in a love-hate relationship. It's like I feel the same way. I listen to John Coltrane, and knowing how hard it is to play John Coltrane solos on the trombone as opposed to the saxophone is frustrating because I really dig what John Coltrane's doing, but at the same time I have to remind myself like I get to sound like a trombone,
Yeah.
and it's all worth it. So yeah, I definitely feel that. I guess that was a really long-winded answer to I get
No.
hating and loving the trombone.
Yeah. I definitely relate to that. Um, I'll just go through quickly like another thing about Barry. He was also like a uh pretty involved in just regular like jazz going on at the time, like Coltrane and all the they said he worshipped John Coltrane and Sonny Rollins, like that were like some of his musical idols. Um, but then also, but his main influence is on Latin jazz, which is um, kind of ironic considering like he was like a kind of a jazz guy like this um, Jewish guy in New York who happened to have like a huge influence on the sound of the Latin sound coming out of New York at the time. But he also moved like did other things in his life. Probably like the most notable one that um, he was part of as a co-founder was Dreams, which is this like jazz rock fusion band with the Brecker brothers. Um, oh, I'm totally forgetting who the drummer is and the bass player, but it's this really cool, just like jazz fusion group that I don't. It's looking. They're not very. Those records are not very popular right now, but it looks like back in the day. I mean, you got Michael Brecker on it. Um, it's a killer group, but he was a main part of that. He also was a producer that like says that most of his credits don't exist because he just did them for free. So a lot of like the Palmieri stuff, he did helped cut like the tapes for it and do a lot of the arranging as far as after they recorded the main rhythm section parts, he would help edit all the tapes just because he was a well-rounded musician as well as a trombone player, but just like he was a musician first. Um, Kind of just shows how influential he was, but he also, I mean, it was so hard to find information about this. Again, if he didn't have like a living son right now, it would most of his this information I think would just kind of be gone. I'm sure Eddie has stuff out there too, but most of this resources is from Chris Rogers. But it sounds like he not only helped produce a lot of these albums, but he also played on them. Um, so the last album he was on before he died was the White album, 1981 Eddie Palmieri album, self-titled. It was his last recording with Palmieri, and he also played all the trombone parts on it. He was the only trombone player on it.
Hell
And
yeah.
then his last Latin recording was with Eddie's brother Charlie on Mambo Show. If you want to check those out, I was checking them out earlier last night, and it's incredible, especially the Palmieri one. They're both Palmieri ones. The White Album one, Eddie's one. um, but yeah, that kind of wraps up my little section on Barry Rogers. Like huge influence on all these things, and also a large part of what the sound was with La Perfecta and later albums that kind of changed.
Yeah, man. I guess like the last thing I kind of want to say about Barry and Jose for that matter is like I will get to Conrad in a second here, but I was listening to a Conrad interview and he was talking about Eddie Palmieri, and I'll talk about their relationship. It's pretty special. Um, but he said that Barry Rogers was the greatest trombonist in the history of salsa. He says Barry would take Eddie Palmieri to see Thelonious Monk and John Coltrane, and he said that because of that, Eddie was a huge fan of McCoy Tyner, the pianist for John
Mm.
Coltrane, if you're not familiar. And he really fused that into his music and would use McCoy Tyner voicings while comping in a clave. Um, and like that just kind of speaks to like what I was saying about how he was really Eddie Palmieri was really open to listening to all these other styles and like using all this influence. And it's cool that Barry Rogers was like a huge part in exposing Eddie to all these things that had a huge impact on his music. Um, and that also, like first Conrad Herwig's the man, and if Conrad Herwig's saying that you're the most influent or the most important trombonist in salsa, like that's a big deal. Um, and like I was just gonna say about Barry and Jose before we go to break here is like I I was a little sad when doing research for this. I know that one of my goals with this pod is to dig deep and like give light to different people and stuff. And I feel like I kind of scratched on the surface. Definitely, Jared did a great job with Barry. But there's not enough info out there, you know. And I would implore you guys to, you know, if you know more than us, like comment, you know, tell me, shoot me messages, like get the info on the internet, get it out to me, I'll put it out, you know, or but like you know, if you're a college student right now, like you're a junior and you're like, I don't know what I'm gonna do my paper on, especially if you're like an ethnomusicologist or something. Do a paper on Jose, do a paper on Barry, do a paper on all these guys. Like, get the info out there. Like, we kind of have to lead the charge sometimes, you know. Like, I mean, like, it just kind of is what it is. But like, the world doesn't always like get super hype on the trombonist in a group. You know, sometimes not even credited. Just like this guy in the background, like, oh, there's a trombone. You know, like, you know, we have to be the ones to push the envelope and like get the info out there. And like with Jose, man, it really bums me out. There's not that much out there. Like, if you knew Jose, if you're not a trombonist and you knew Jose, man, I mean, I hope there's somebody listening to this right now. Like, man, these cats like just don't know where it's at. Like, there's all this information on them. Like, if you got that, man, like, please share it, because you know, it just makes me a little sad. Like, I don't understand the dispersion of information on the internet. Like when we did recently, we did a podcast on olds, and I think it's super cool that all this information was available. But it's a little crazy to me that like I found out Reginald Old's house buying. Like I knew all the houses he lived in. I knew his tea time. I knew his favorite drink of choice. And I really struggled to find out if Jose Rodriguez was dead or alive. And it just, I don't know, man. It can't be like that, you know? So, like, if you know something, please share. If you don't know something, maybe this is, like, a killer subject to do research on, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
One resource I have actually that I found, there's a like a Facebook group page or whatever it's called Admiradores de Barry Rogers. So it's just like people just posting a bunch of pictures. It's the most recent post is from May, so it's not super active, but even that's like surprisingly active for what I was expecting. But it's all in Spanish. Luckily, you can translate it, but it doesn't quite work. Um, but that's actually a pretty cool resource to find like a bunch of these old pictures that people have. It's mostly just people saying what we've already said, and uh, it's a lot of pictures without a lot of information, but it's still like a great start. That's how I found some of the resources, was through that.
yeah, man.
Only
All right.
80
Well,
people in this group.
all right. Well, we're gonna go to break. While we're on break, go join the Barry Rogers Facebook page. So. All right, welcome back to the slideshow. So as we kind of brought up right before we ended there, talking about Conrad, I'm gonna like hit a bunch of guys, and it is a lot of guys, so I'm just gonna kind of hit them and talk about maybe something you should check out, maybe their gear, that kind of thing. But one guy I wanted to like hover on for a second was Conrad Herwig, and I'm not gonna do a Conrad Herwig bio because I will 100% do a Conrad episode down the road. As Ben and probably Jared can testify, I'm a pretty big Conrad fan. Maybe a bit too much though sometimes. He's definitely the man. I was lucky enough to interview him for a comp paper when I was in grad school, and that was incredible. Hearing like my favorite trombonist say the shit that I thought he'd say and impart wisdom. And so yeah, huge Conrad guy, but I'm specifically going to go into his relationship to Eddie Palmieri, and also Conrad Herwig is how I learned about Eddie Palmieri, which I know is pretty weird. Most people who know about him are just like into Latin music, and he's had a huge impact. I think probably more famous than Conrad.
Yeah, honestly,
I
I know way more about Eddie than I do Conrad because I kind
yeah.
of went that route. Just first learning about like Tito Puente, getting into music, like Latin music that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely on the other side of the spectrum. I definitely, as much as I've learned about Eddie here, I know a bunch about Conrad, but but yeah, his Conrad's Latin side albums are how I got into Eddie Palmieri, um, and so that's what I'm gonna kind of talk about. I will quickly I guess like a really condensed, super fast bio on my favorite trombonist of all time and one of the most impactful trombonists of our time. He was born. He was raised in Hawaii, a military-based thing. Went to UNT. Played with some of the biggest names. Huge Joe Henderson guy, like, and next worldly playing. If you're not familiar with Conrad, go check it out. I seriously, I think he's, in my opinion, the best trombone player on the planet, maybe. But if I mean, even if you don't think that, it's gonna blow you away. He's really incredibly good. And his gear, if you're into that, he currently plays on a Wrath. Which, by the way, guys, I found out that if you play a Wrath, apparently they make a big deal about it, and they have like a whole artist page where they give you crazy amounts of detail, which is cool, especially for this kind of thing. But also, I don't know, interesting other people don't, but he plays Wrath R10 with a nickel silver bell and slide, and the gooseneck and tuning slide is yellow brass, and the lead pipe is a 10N. I have no idea what that means. I guess if you call into Wrath, you could get that exact model. And his mouthpiece is some debate about this on the internet, but either a Bach 12 or a Bach 7. And I also no, he used to not play on Wrath. He used to play like I believe he played like a box Strad. You can dig into that. I actually found a pretty cool thing in relation to his gear that I'll go over. And this actually has to do with Eddie Palmieri, even, which is pretty cool. That Matt K, who's on the trombone chat, he's pretty active. He's got a lot of cool stuff, cool knowledge. Um, so he uses a Con 36H alto trombone that Conrad used on Ritmo Caliente, which is a Eddie Palmieri album. That the 36H is switched from so that the attachment is the primary slide, so it's a B flat instead of an E flat, and the trigger goes to E flat. Which, if you're not familiar with alto trombones are in E flat, and so some of them have triggers on them, not all of them, but some of them, and that trigger is always converts it to a B flat trombone, which like your normal tenor. So like for me, who doesn't play alto trombone, I guess I'm a little ashamed to admit that. But I feel like I should, especially with all the classical guys I've studied with and orchestra stuff. I've gone back and forth on it, but when I play an alto trombone, if it has that trigger, I just engage that bad boy and play it because I don't really know my slide positions in E flat. Sorry. And I guess Conrad did something similar where at least he felt more comfortable in B flat, so he just made it a B flat trombone and has the E flat attachment for higher stuff. So that's kind of neat that we know exact trombone he used on one of the albums. I also don't really know much about Conrad using an alto. That was kind of the first I'd heard of it, and it's kind of cool that we have an exact track down of one of the trombones. I guess fun little alto story, not to get too off track here. There's this guy who's really big in the alto trombone community. It seems he's alto bone online. His name is Michael Lake, and to me, he's like one of the biggest proponents for alto trombone because he does a lot of jazz stuff with it and different stuff. And considers himself primarily an alto trombonist. It's just a really cool video on how he records himself. He puts out lots of material, lots of free material. If you go to his website and just subscribe, he'll send you like music and stuff pretty frequently. I did. It's a lot of cool stuff. Like if you're listening to this pod and you're nerdy enough about trombone to listen to a trombone pod, you'll probably dig it. So go check out Michael Lake's stuff. But he has a story about how, I don't know if it was him or someone else, handed J.J. Johnson an alto trombone, and he tried to play it, and since it was an E flat, I guess it like weirded him out, and he was like, "What the hell is this?" and like gave it back to gave it back to him. So I love that story. But yeah, so he did use that alto trombone that Matt Kay had. And so in relationship to Eddie, Conrad has had a lot of work with Latin jazz in general. And the first Latin jazz person he played with was Mario Balza. I also learned about Mario Balza because funny story, I found this Mario Balza album. I don't know how I found it, but I'm sitting in my car listening to it, and this trombone solo comes, and I was just like, holy shit, like this guy's sound is incredible. It was just a ballad, but he sounded amazing. And I was like, oh my god, like who is this? And then I found out that it was Conrad, and I was like, of course, like figures, like I find this incredible trombonist, and it just ends up being Conrad. Adds up. But so we would play with Mario Bauza, and he was in that band. Mario Bauza is also a pretty influential trombonist, like coming out of New York, same kind of scene, like we're talking about with all these guys. Or I don't know if I said influential. He's an influential musician in Latin music. He's not a trombonist. I don't know if I just said that, but scratch that. But while he was in Mario Bauza's band, he knew about Eddie Palmieri. He was a big fan of Eddie Palmieri's, and he was like having lunch with Bauza, and Eddie Palmieri was there, and Conrad was like kind of freaking out, and Bauza was like, "Oh, like," and he's like, "I'll introduce you." So he comes up and he's like, "Hey, I have this incredible trombonist," and that was kind of how they met. Was they talked, and then like Eddie heard him play, and he was like, "Oh, I'm definitely gonna hire this guy." Which, by the way, man, is kind of like the repeating story of Conrad Herwig's life. Is like he goes and plays trombone for these people who like don't even have trombones in their group, and they're like, "Oh shit, yes, I definitely want this guy on my music." Like, and Conrad's super humble about it, but yeah, he's he's ridiculous. Man, God, not to keep getting strung off on Conrad stories, but that's what happens when I talk about him. But he was in Buddy Rich's band, and while he was in Buddy Rich's band, Buddy Rich converted a lot of tenor sax solos to the trombone part because Conrad was so killing. And Michael Davis replaced Conrad in Buddy Rich's band, and he said, like, yeah, like when I first got in, I was like, what the hell are all these crazy solos doing in the trombone? And they were like, oh, he just did it because Conrad was sitting there. So, yeah, definitely kind of a cool little tidbit about Conrad playing some advanced material. But so we got going with Eddie Palmieri, and when he was going with Eddie Palmieri, he was at that time the only white person in the group, like in that iteration of the of Eddie's band at the time. And they actually got really close. And while he was touring with Eddie throughout Europe and stuff, he said jokingly that he was like the only person who didn't speak Spanish, so he learned Spanish while he was in that group. And because he said he wanted to hear what they were saying about him, which is funny. I don't think they were saying anything bad, but he actually learned Spanish while he was with Eddie, and him and Eddie were super close. He actually made Eddie Palmieri the godfather to his oldest son. So there's a fun deep cut for you. Eddie Palmieri is the godfather of Conrad Herwig's oldest son. But yeah, while he was in that band, he became like a big fan of Barry Rogers, so I think he probably knew about him before, but that was what he said about that. And then with Eddie, he was on Listen Here, Ritmo Caliente, La Perfecta 2, Full Circle, Mi Luz Mayor, and Mi Luz Mayor. And I'll also kind of say, talking about La Perfecta 2, if you go through the personnel that's on the La Perfecta 2 album, it's Brian Lynch on trumpet, Conrad on trombone, Dinas Prieto on drums, Herman Oliveira on vocals, John Rodriguez Jr. on guiro, Jose Santiago on bass, John Rodriguez again, Pedro E. Rodriguez on clave, George Delgado on congas, and Ray Vieira on coro. And then on some various tracks, you have Pedro E. Rodriguez on trumpet, Doug Beavers, Reynaldo Jorge on trombone, Richo Flores on congas, and Pedro E. Rodriguez on coro. I just wanted to I'll list all those guys off because I think that album kind of sets the tone for like a second half of Eddie Palmieri in terms of the La Perfecta band. But one of the dudes in there is Brian Lynch, who I know plays with Eddie a lot still on trumpet, and Brian Lynch is also a big part of Conrad. Like, the Latin side albums have Brian Lynch, and then I know that Conrad and Brian Lynch work together a lot. Brian Lynch actually teaches trumpet at Frost. I don't know if he's still doing that. He did do that. I assume he's still there, but teaches at Frost in Miami. So kind of a cool dude to check out. But so Conrad decided he was going to do these Latin side albums, and the concept behind the Latin side is like, you do these albums with jazz artists that aren't necessarily Latin musicians, like John Coltrane, Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, and like Latinify their music, if you will. And he had some pretty interesting stuff out there if you want to dig into it, on how some music really leans into working well with that already. But part of him doing that was just playing with Eddie, and Eddie using those McCoy Tyner voicings, and like seeing how the music was already kind of doing that. And so he brought Eddie Palmieri in to play as a special guest on those albums. I think there's one that he's not on, but he is definitely on Latin side of John Coltrane, Latin side of Wayne Shorter, Latin side of Herbie Hancock. Which also, I guess like right now is a good time to bring this up. There's a new Latin side coming out, Latin side of Charles Mingus. He's released a single for it, but he hasn't released the whole album. I'm pretty pumped. The single sounds super cool. So go check that out if you're into it. I do not know the personnel on that album. I don't know if it has any or not, but you should definitely check those out. But yeah, I think that the Conrad thing is like a big connection because of the Latin side albums, because of his influence on Eddie, and because of Eddie's influence on Conrad, their close relationship, and just also talking about, like, we were talking earlier about Barry Rogers and how he sounds with Eddie, and how it's like this super hard, abrasive sound. While Conrad definitely gets some crazy high acrobatics and plays with a lot of intensity, it's a much different sound. And it's like, I think that's kind of more what the guys are doing now, but it's like, it just kind of, once again, multiple ways to do something, and just kind of like marks a change in the sound as far as what people were doing. And then after that, I just kind of want to go into some random guys here who were on different Eddie Palmieri albums, and like kind of in no order here. So the first guy I want to talk about is Jimmy Bosch. He was born in 1959, October 18th, actually, if you're if you're curious. He's still alive. He does tour with Eddie occasionally. And I actually really enjoyed this dude. I was not familiar with him before, but he's like super killing. He's in the Spanish Harlem Orchestra, which has got a lot of these newer guys that are playing with Eddie. It seems like there's a real connection there. Some of the older guys who played with Eddie are even in this group. But he's got a really cool, really killing. I'd say he call himself salsa. Is like a very big salsa thing. One of my favorite albums that he did was La Noticia, which is like a song on his album Salsa Dura, which he put out in 2000. His gear, also a Wrath user, so crazy amount of info here. Which was also mentioned on his Wikipedia, which is not always the case, so I guess a big-time Wrath user. But he plays an R2, which I don't play Wrath, so I don't really know what these numbers mean. I think they're all size-dependent, but I don't know if it gets bigger or smaller with the numbers. I'm not real sure, so... but it's a 510 bore. Custom, but usually comes with a 7.5 bell. His horn is brass, nickel, silver. Is a nickel silver 2-in lead pipe. Once again, I don't know what the number system is on those, but you can check out, like, because I showed Conrad's earlier. And I'm not sure what his mouth is, but I thought it was like a buck. He was born in Jersey City. He's of Puerto Rican descent, and that kind of all adds up with like the Harlem scene. Started playing trombone and was a member of some local Latin bands by the age of 13. They attended Rutgers, which, fun fact, is where Conrad Herwig teaches now. Although, whenever this guy was at Rutgers, Conrad definitely wasn't there yet. I don't believe that math wouldn't add up. We started classical music at age 18, recorded 4 albums as a leader: Sonido Trombone, 1998, Salsa Dura, 1999-2000, Avion de la Salsa 2004, and A Million 2009 on JRGR Records. Is playing with a ton of huge names in Latin music. Fania, which we kind of mentioned earlier for Jose Rodriguez, Eddie Palmieri, Ruben Blades, Typico Novela, Combinación Perfecta, Pete El Conde Rodriguez, and Manny Oquendo. And he's with Eddie on Full Circle, Live from the Bronx, Mi Luz Mayor. This dude's a big part of the Spanish Harlem Orchestra. I definitely recommend that you guys check that out. Their music is super killing, and it is really like a big part of these modern Latin trombonist guys. And so much good stuff to dig into there. The next guy I want to dig into is Chris Washburn, which is a name that I had heard a lot, but I hadn't really put the face in the name. Like, I'd seen him, I didn't know it was him. I'd heard his name on different stuff. He has a bunch of different albums. I would suggest Low Riding was one of them, and Roots, Fields, and Moons. Those are some of his... Rags and Roots, Field of Moons is another one. Those are kind of his albums as a leader. I always like, with these smaller guys, I say smaller, with these guys who are sidemen on these albums and stuff, when we're digging into their stuff, that's one of my favorite ways to explore music, is like, I find an album I dig, and then I find out who the personnel is, and especially the trombonist, and then I go see if they have albums as leaders and stuff. And so, like, it's always cool to see what their musical identity is. But he's with Eddie Palmieri on Mi Luz Mayor, Full Circle, and Ritmo Caliente. This is kind of these recent albums. That's where these guys are kind of all coming together on these albums. But this guy is the professor of music and chair of the music department at Columbia University. There's a bunch of information on this guy, so I'll try to be quick. He has a BM from Wisconsin, a master's in music from New England Conservatory, and then he has PhD in ethnomusicology at Columbia University. In case you don't know, ethnomusicology is the study of different music cultures, which explains why he's so active in this Latin music, but also, like, I don't know, if you're not sure what you do with your PhD, maybe an interesting one to do. I haven't really considered doing ethnomusicology, but I'm kind of thinking about it now, like, just, I have an interest in this kind of music, but also Swedish stuff, but yeah, that's a cool...
To break in real quick, that's actually one big thing I've been trying to look into, is ethnomusicology as a... because I only have my undergraduate in commercial music, but I've been looking at different universities in either ethnomusicology or musicology, but ethnomusicology is preferred to me. It's so niche that there's not a lot of programs out there. Sorry to break in, but
no, you're good. Yeah, no, I think definitely, like, if it kind of depends what you want to do, but that's totally. It'll help you out. Like, there's a lot of people with performance degrees out there, so if you want to like maybe get into a university job teaching some kind of music history or something, or an ethnomusicology class, like, it might be a cool opening. And also, just like, I think it would be super hip to look into different cultures and different kinds of music around the world. But yeah, he spent 2 years living in Zambia in 1985, studying traditional music of the region, and then 1993 he received a Mellon Fellowship to travel and explore rich musical traditions of Cuba, which is probably where he got into all this Eddie Palmieri stuff and, like, understanding the root of this music. So he has some pretty cool YouTube videos out that are put out by the Lincoln Center's Foundation. I think it's like maybe jazz.org or something. I'm not really sure what their official name is, but you can find the videos by looking him up. You can also probably find them up by looking up, like, the jazz video Lincoln Center. I'm not sure how they're titled. But he has a video on the history of trombone in classical and jazz. Okay. Yeah, he has a video on the history of trombone in classical and jazz, and I know he has another video. I think it's on warming up. I did want to point out about this history of trombone in classical and jazz, but I watched it, obviously. It's kind of my thing, digging into the stuff. But he said that the instrument was invented in 1475 by Hans Nigel in Germany. And I was gonna say, I don't want to get too sidetracked by this, but if you go back and listen to our origins of the trombone, we talked specifically about kind of this period, and this is definitely debatable. I'm gonna do more research and see why he picked Hans Nigel. It would have been a sackbut, if you will. We've talked about how sackbut's not a accepted term everywhere. How like in Germany they said pisson and they still say pisson. So sackbut's a French thing, but kind of like there's a debate on whether or not there's an actual difference in the build of the trombone enough to warrant a name change. But you get the period by maybe saying sackbut. But one of his sons or grandsons, I'm not sure given the time, has one of his trombones or his sackbuts in a museum, and you can actually go find on the internet, like you can see pictures of the instrument. And Hans Nigel was a trombone player, so not only did he make them, but he also played. And I mean, even if he's not the inventor of trombone, it's pretty cool to go check out, see what you can about him, and see like one of these really early trombone guys. And it would be cool if the inventor of the trombone was a trombonist. But I will say, I guess not to like go hard other angle. I don't know where he got that particular information. He may have something much deeper than I do. I do kind of have information that the trombone was around, or at least mentioned before that. Of course, when you get into like 1430 kind of years, 1450 kind of years, there's some debate on whether the terms being used were actually referencing a trombone or a different instrument, so that can become problematic. And I also know that I think it's kind of a big deal that like the only like orchestral instrument that we know the exact inventor is like the saxophone, so I'm not sure how Hans Nigel would be the guy. I do know that like on this pod we were kind of like a Germany invented the trombone. That was kind of where we settled for personal preference, and there's also debate about that, you know, like if it was from Italy. We do know that Germany had the first factories, which is important, so manufacturing definitely was booming in Germany, but with Italy and these other places. So yeah, I'm not real sure. If you want to dig into that, go for it. I'll probably do some digging into it later. But yeah, I just thought it was really interesting that he listed a specific guy. The instrument in the orchestra that knows its inventor is the saxophone, because it's like the newest one. It's like Aldolfo Sax or something. What's his name?
I think so.
I don't know. This isn't a saxophone pod. Who cares, right? But yeah, interesting he said that in that YouTube video. I would be interested in where he got that. I'd be interested in hearing him tell me where he got that. He has several books, which is pretty cool because he is big in the university world. He has Bad Music, the music we love to hate. I'm actually pretty interested in that. Sounding Salsa, performing Latin music in New York. He did in 2008. And Latin jazz and other jazz that he did in 2020. He's on over 150 recordings, which is a lot. He has 7 Grammy nominations and 2 Grammy wins. That's pretty cool. 1 year he was voted a rising star by Downbeat magazine. Several times, I guess. And he's played with, I have a pretty cool list here, Tito Puente, Celia Cruz, Eddie Palmieri, Muha Richard, Abrams, Ruben Blades, Celine Dion, Gloria Estefan, Justin Timberlake, Mark Anthony, Bjork, They Might Be Giants, Roscoe Mitchell, Grady Tate, Yaki Biard, Duke Ellington Orchestra, Danilo Kami, Ram Blake, the Smithereens, Don Richels, Arturo Sandoval, Hilton Ruiz, Lawrence Butch Morris, Roswell Rudd, that's a cool trombone, you should check out if you're not familiar, Walter Thompson, RMM All-Star Salsa Band, Eddie Henderson, Anthony Braxton, Ray Barretto, John Cale, Baba Alatunye, Cadito, Freddie Cole, Marie Snyder, Big Band, Chico Afero, Leslie Ugams, De Capo, Opera Company, St. Luke's Chamber Orchestra, Bang on the Can All-Stars, SEM Ensemble, American Microtonal Festival Chamber Orchestra, that's a fun one, said that 10 times fast, and the Dinosaur Annex, and he is the leader of a highly acclaimed SYOTOS Latin Jazz, the FFEAR, Fear, and the Rags and Roots Jazz Band. So, it was a super long list, but he's on a bunch of stuff. Check out his albums, check out his books. Obviously, a very educated guy who's done a lot of research. It's very cool. Not real sure on his gear. He made it extra hard on me because whatever it is, he scrapped the lacquer off of. And I also think he took the counterweight off. There is no counterweight, so I assume there probably wasn't ever one. Maybe there was. I don't know. It took the counterweight off. So, and it's not really listed anywhere. So with my eyes, like I was doing that check with Jared earlier, it's really tough. There was a couple comments saying it was a Martin committee, but a rival comment said he was on a box 6. I think box 6s are more common, so that's more likely. But maybe it is a Martin committee, which is a cool horn. That is Chris Washburn. I'm gonna do now Doug Beavers. He's with Eddie Palmieri on La Perfecta 2, Ritmo Caliente, and Listen Here, Mi Luz Mayor. He has a bunch of a ton of his own stuff. He's really big in the Spanish Harlem Orchestra, which I was talking about earlier. A lot of these guys are. It's a super cool group. If you're not familiar, check out. He has a website, like a lot of these guys do, but this one's kind of cool because he has a lot of good information on there. He has a new album coming out, Soul, which he's pushing pretty hard on there. But I think that this guy, while he's a great trombonist, a lot of his stuff he's known as an arranger. He does a lot of arranging for the Spanish Harlem Orchestra, and he's a big arranging guy in New York. He has an album called The Art of the Arrangement in 2017. You should go check out his music. I would listen to this new album coming out, Soul, because it's going to help him the most right now. I'm all about supporting these guys. I mean, once again, guys, like I said about finding information on Jose Rodriguez, it's like, in the trombone world, it's like it's amazing when non-trombonists help you out and support you, but at the same time, like, it's nice to have the support of trombone players. I know this pod's listen to trombone players, so it's like, yeah, definitely go check out his new stuff and help the guy out. And its music is killing too, so it's like it's not like you're not getting anything out of it. He went to Manhattan School of Music in 2002. And that's kind of where he was catapulted into international significance. And then you got Eddie Palmieri found him. Oh, this is pretty cool. And Eddie Palmieri asked him to transcribe and arrange his complete repertoire for his La Perfecta group. So it's pretty cool that of the 1960s. So it's cool that he like went back and like arranged out all of his music. And like that preservation is super cool. He's recorded and arranged for Spanish Harlem Orchestra, Christian McBride, Mingus Big Band, Ruben Blades, Typica 73, Gilberto Santa Rodriguez, Paul Simon, Willie Colon, who I talked about earlier, the trombonist, John Locke, Tom Harrell, Bob Mincer, Dave Liebman, Kurt Elling, and countless others. So yeah, some huge names in there. I mean, Bob Mincer, Christian McBride, these are like, Mingus Big Band, these are big time groups. He also started his own recording group, Circle 9, during COVID, which I'm all about that. I know that there was like a huge deal with Herb Albert. He like was very famously in control of his production of music and making his money and not giving it away to people. So yeah, like always supporting that. Another reason you should buy this new album, because I'm sure it'll be on his recording stuff, and he'll get a lot out of it. His gear is an Anton Courtois Extreme 402. Has a 508 bore with an 8-inch red brass bell, a yellow brass hand slide, and nickel sleeves and ergonomic grip. I'm not really sure what ergonomic grip means. Maybe this is like the Williams grip, where it like curves over, but it could be slightly different. And Courtois, I've played a little bit, but not great. There's a bunch of guys in town who play them. Delph plays on. Steve Davis plays a Courtois, an older one, granted, but it's a French company. I know that Jürgen von Riem plays a Courtois, classically speaking. And the Extreme, I'm not really familiar with their stuff, but 508 bore, that puts it like at a King 3B size. All right, the next person I want to talk about is Reynaldo Jorge. I guess some people, he's listed as Ronald Jorge at times. I wonder if he goes by both. Pretty common with Latin Americans. There's some videos of him playing on YouTube. It's like really tasty. But the this is one of the older guys who was born in Puerto Rico and moved to New York in 1971, which is kind of putting him in that group of like guys who. One second. But yeah, he's one of these older guys. So he like when he moved to Harlem, and then he started playing with these groups and like spreading Latin jazz throughout the world. He's like a big part of that. He was, like I said, born in Puerto Rico, New York in '71. He currently teaches part time at Robert Treat Academy in New Jersey. It's a blue ribbon charter school. I didn't really know what blue ribbon was. I looked it up. It's like I guess that's like the high scores, so that's cool. Um, he's part of the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra Community Arts Advisor Council, so it's like he's giving back a lot. It's super cool. And he currently regularly performs with the Mambo Legend Orchestra and that Spanish Harlem Orchestra as well. That's kind of where I found a lot of him stuff at. And then I kind of found a little thing here, a little write up on him. He joined the Fania All Star and appears in the movie Out Latin Thing. With the band, Reynaldo has been instrumental in bringing salsa music to other parts of the world, including Russia, Egypt, Singapore, Indonesia, Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, China, and many other areas. His playing has been recorded on over 50 albums, including a couple that won Grammys: Ruben Blades, Antecides, Tito Puente's Homane a Beni, and Mambo Birdland, Tito Puente and Eddie Palmieri's Masterpiece, and others. He performs regularly with Mambo Legend Orchestra and Spanish Harlem Orchestra. So yeah, definitely been a big part of the Latin scene for a long time here. But he looks like he plays in the Spanish Harlem Orchestra a lot with Jimmy Bosch, who I mentioned earlier, and Doug Beavers as well. And I know he goes back and forth between Puerto Rico and America for music. They started playing when he was about 15, and his first big group was well-known trumpet player Jose Polas, and then when he graduated high school, he became part of the Chachon y sus Betrumicios. That was a really tough one for me, guys. I'm sorry. Orchestra, where he debuted some of his classmates from Escuela Libre de Música, which just means school library of music, I assume. Libre, I think. No, biblioteca is library. I know, I obviously don't speak Spanish, guys. I'm sorry. I'm trying to do my best here. Escuela is school, so school of music. I'm not sure what libre means. As the famous trumpeter Luis Esteban Petru Ortiz and saxophonist Wilfred de la Torres and singer Samuel Rola Gonzalez. So, yeah, like, maybe not on as much stuff as, like, the Barry Rogers and Jose Rodriguez were mentioned earlier, but definitely an older guy who's had a big impact. And this guy's still around and kicking and playing with the Spanish Harlem Orchestra, so definitely check him out, you know. Another guy I'm going to go into is played with Eddie. I know we're just, like, hitting a bunch of guys, but hopefully, like, just pick one of them and check him out. Some cool stuff. Is Tokunori Kajiwara. Kajiwara? Yeah. Once again, I don't speak Spanish. I also don't speak Japanese, so I'm sorry if I butchered that name. I'm pretty sure that's close, though. Tokunori Kajiwara. His nickname is Kaji. And there's some cool solos on YouTube. He was born in Japan in '75, and he's with Eddie on Mi Luz Mayor and Full Circle. But his connection to this Latin scene is in 1995, the year I was born, by the way. He moved to the U.S. and studied at Roosevelt University in Chicago. And in 2000, he got his bachelor's degree in trombone and moved back to Japan. And then in 2002, he got a scholarship to Emerson, where he studied with Steve Turre, and then a lot of the groups there at the school, the Afro-Cuban Jazz Orchestra, the Concert Jazz Band, and the MSM Jazz Orchestra. And in 2004, he got his master's degree in jazz performance. Yeah, I also think it's kind of cool that from 2000 to 2002, he was, like, in Japan just practicing. I always kind of find it's interesting when you look at guys who, like, took a period of reflection or practice before re-entering the scene, because, you know, it's like a thing that Sonny Rollins did, man. He, like, he was a big-time saxophonist, but he wasn't happy with where he was at necessarily, so he took, like, a year off and just practiced every day. Actually practiced on a bridge. It's it's like a whole thing you can look into, but I don't know what this guy is. I don't know if he wanted to stay in the U.S. and just was having trouble making that happen, but it is cool that he had this period of practicing and trying to get better. During this period, during the period of being at Roosevelt, he met Mayo Tiana, former trombone player with the Ray Charles Orchestra, and he graduated May 2000 with his degree, and then he went back to Japan, and then he spent those years practicing. And then after graduating MSM, he's been active in New York, which is adds up with everyone talking about all these guys are New York guys. He's toured with Cuban pianist Bibo Valdez in Spain, and he's toured with Arturo O'Farrill, ALJO in Greece, Switzerland and U.S., Spanish Harlem Orchestra in the U.S., and Jimmy Bosch, and he's performed with McCoy Tyner, Paquito de Rivera, Steve Torrea, O'Farrill, Eddie Palmieri, Andy Gonzalez, Luis Bonilla, Eddie Martinez, David Sanchez, Dave Valentin, Nicky Marrero, Albita, Oscar Brown Jr., Jerry the Iceman Butler, the Village Vanguard Orchestra, Mingus Bam Bam, Chico Ferro, Afro-Cuban Jazz Orchestra, Afro Jazz Latin Orchestra, Mambo Legends, and the Ray Charles Orchestra, Mike Longo Big Band, Frank Lacey's Vibe Tribe. Frank Lacey's another trombonist. If you're not familiar with them, go check them out. And Brooklyn Big Band. He also appeared at top venues such as Birdland, Blue Note, and Jazz Standard. So he's definitely gotten around. His gear, I couldn't get super specific. He plays a Greg Black mouthpiece that's gold plated. And I think his trombone is some sort of King Silver Sonic, but it also looks like he plays other stuff, which kind of looked like a Shire. Okay, and then one more trombonist here. I know I'm throwing a bunch of guys at you, but this is kind of what I wanted the episode to turn into on the second half, was just hitting guys and like digging in so that you get a little taste of them and go find out more yourself. Is Joe Fielder. And he was like a big part. This guy's been a big part of both the jazz scene and the Latin music scene. He's with Eddie on Full Circle, Mi Luz Mayor. But go check out his Bandcamp. He has a lot of cool music on there, and be a good way to support him. I know he's about to come out with another album, or just did. And one of the ones I was digging was Open Sesame. But he has a lot of music to pick from, and he has some really cool, interesting sounding stuff. Looks like there's a big Mangelsdorf vibe. I know one of them, he's doing the Mangelsdorf thing where he's using a lot of polyphonics and playing solo. It's always kind of cool to see the Mangelsdorf tradition carried on, because it's a little off the beaten path, but like definitely a cool, unique aspect of the trombone that I think we should explore. So he used to play on Broadway. He had in many pits, and in 2009 he transitioned to being the musical director of Sesame Street. So so he went from playing 350 gigs a year to being the musical director for Sesame Street, which is kind of why the album I was talking about, Open Sesame, is entitled that. He has I think that album and other albums that are the music of Sesame Street. But so you probably heard this guy's music, whether you knew it or not. He was a Pittsburgh native and a New Yorker since 1993. He studied at Allegheny College and then the University of Pittsburgh before becoming a sideman in New York. He's played with Marie Schneider, Chico Farrow, Mingus Bing Band, Andrew Hill, Jason Lindor, Daphne Perito, Kenny Wheeler, Satoko Fuji, Miguel Zaynat, really cool saxophone player if you're not familiar, and many more. I'm sorry I'm listing these off so fast. It's just because I've been reading through a lot of these lists. He also is playing smaller units with Lee Konitz, Anthony Braxton, Cecil Taylor, Mira Melford, Matt Durias Ballin, the Jack, David Weiss, Endangered Species, and a host of others. He also did a lot of playing in the Latin circuit, which is I got with Eddie. So Celia Cruz, Eddie Palmieri, Willie Colon, Ralph Izari, and many other acts. And his prop credits include Jennifer Lopez, Mark Antony, Wycliffe, Jean, Flower Tops, Melba Moore, and Leslie Gore, to name a few. His gear, he plays the Shires. I'm not sure what the specs are. And he plays a Greg Black mouthpiece. So there you go. I know I just kind of vomited out 6 or 7 trombone players there, but just a bunch of guys who have played with Eddie. And if it felt like a lot of guys, that's because Eddie has hired a lot of dudes. That was why we did this episode, because he's in his own way kind of like one of the patron saints of the trombone. As we had that episode, I always like to say that. The album rec for this week, or for this episode, is La Perfecta, the first one, from 1962. I just kind of thought It's like one of the earliest, maybe the earliest Eddie Palmieri album, and I don't know, it just kind of kicks off his sound and everything. So uh, we've already given you a ton of stuff to go listen to, but if I'd also suggest checking this one out. It's got Joe Rivera on bass. Coro is Shiverico. That's as close as I think I'm going to get. Shiverico, Davila, Victor Vasquez, and Willie Torres. On flute, it's got George Castro. Eddie Palmieri plays piano, obviously. Percussion is Charlie Palmieri, who Jared talked about earlier. Luis Chiqui Perez, Manny Oquendo, and on congas is George Maisonet. And the trombonists are Barry Rogers and Wow Donato. And the trumpet is Al DeRisi, Harold Wegbright, Joe Damari, and Willie Matos. And then Ismael Quintana is on vocals. Donato, you talked a little bit about Donato earlier, didn't you, man?
Yeah, I was just saying. Yeah, I mean, this is where he shows up. He's on the album. I didn't really mention other than he's the one who like did all the recordings for this, but I didn't say he was ever really part of La Perfecta, the band. But he's on the first album.
Oh yeah, so he's the one on the recording, but he's not the one on the album cover.
Yeah, it's Mark Weinstein on the album cover. Also, that vocalist is the same one I mentioned earlier with the Mozambique. Same vocalist. Probably a lot of the same people I didn't even look into who's in that one, but it features the vocalist for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that's gonna kind of wrap it up. This episode's gotten surprisingly long, but it's okay. Recently, I've quit caring so much about going over. Oh, let me know if you're listening to these and you're like it never ends. Then let me know and I'll try and tighten them back up. But I've kind of figured whatever. I'll kind of freeform it. So, I think my wrapping up thoughts before we call it quits here is I mean, go listen to some Eddie Palmieri, man. I mean, if you're not familiar with him, definitely check him out. And if you're not familiar with Latin jazz or anything, I think he's like a really good place to jump off. And I also Eddie Palmieri's impact on the trombone, I think, has been significant. I think it's like made an impact on what we view as the sound of salsa trombone and what we view as the sound of a lot of Latin trombone. And I'm just incredibly appreciative personally of him employing the trombone and featuring that voice because that doesn't always happen. You know, I mean, it's a big deal that Curtis Fuller was the only trombonist that ever played with John Coltrane. You know, and because it's like it puts trombone in this atmosphere, and so it's not always a trombone feature thing. So for a guy to feel like he needed at least two trombones throughout his entire career, I think is really incredible, and I'm really grateful for that. What are your final thoughts, Jared?
Yeah, I don't know. I think we can underestimate how big of an influence this all had on just trombone playing in general, and also just Latin music, the people involved in it. I mean, just mentioning all these people, they were they're in a lot of different groups and a lot of different recordings, kind of all over the world, as far as who they played with. But they all had strong connections to this Latin side of music. And I think a lot of I mean, I don't even want to say it's underappreciated. I feel like you could say that about any genre. You just feel like it needs more appreciation. But especially for these trombone players and trombone as like a staple of the sound, Eddie's stuff is just like the hallmark of it. And the players that played with him and still are playing with him.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for listening. And as always, happy shedding. And I'll see you in the next episode.